When it comes to the debate about the Middle East and the war between Hamas and Israel and the repugnant anti-Semitism that we've seen here unleashed around the world and, of course, in Australia, the media has played a crucial role. As you know, I've railed against biased and misleading coverage from the very first days after the October the 7th atrocity. We've seen shocking moral equivalence between the Hamas terrorist blood-curdling attacks on civilians and the Israeli Defence Force's efforts to defend Israel and eliminate the terrorists. Media organisations have failed to report the extent of the atrocities against Israel. They've amplified Hamas propaganda and falsely accused Israel of murderous attacks. They've sought to legitimise the atrocities of the Islamist extremist terrorist groups funded by Iran as some kind of legitimate war of liberation for Palestine. It's been abhorrent, and tragically for Australian taxpayers, our national broadcaster, the ABC, has been one of the prime offenders. I'm joined now by prominent Melbourne businessman, member of its Jewish community and a former ABC board member, Joseph Gersh. Joseph, thanks for joining us again. I just want to get your thoughts, especially on this day when we see anti-Semitism rising to such a putrid level in this country. What's your thoughts about the role the ABC has played in this debate in this country?
Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. As you would have noticed, I posted in response to Sky News' initiative to have an anti-Semitism summit next week, which was announced by Shari Markson the other night, with the participation of the ECHA spokesman, Alex, who, and I congratulate Sky News for doing that, and for those who are supporting that initiative, including yourself, Chris. So that's where I'd like to begin. But my reaction as a former ABC director and as an Australian member of the Jewish community was, why is this always coming from Sky News? Where is the ABC on all of this? And that's not criticising what Sky News is doing, but it's asking of our national broadcaster, we are in a crisis of anti-Semitism in this country, a crisis. And today's manifestation is just yet another example of what the Jewish community is facing, a crisis which, if not reversed, if not dealt with, is going to undermine the social cohesion of this country, cause the Jewish community to reevaluate the viability of Jewish life in this country. And if, for example, that caravan of explosives had actually done its work, would have fundamentally changed Australia forever. So this is at crisis proportions, and I ask the question, if the ABC is not part of the solution, why is that? And I've said publicly this week and in response before, because it's part of the problem. And I can give 2 or 3 examples of why that's the case. Its head of global affairs is John Lyons, who's an experienced journalist, but one who has declared in writing in his book his animosity towards the state of Israel, and in his monograph, his animosity towards the Jewish organisational structure in this country and many of the Jewish leaders and individuals. Where was the ABC at the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz? Channel 7 was there, Channel 9 was there, Sky was there. Where was the ABC? Why does the ABC platform marginal groups that claim or have Jewish heritage that are anti-Israel in response to the anti-Semitic crisis that we're in? There is a direct line between the way in which the Middle East is covered, the way in which Israel is dealt with, and the way in which the Jewish community is treated. It's not just on the steps of the Opera House, where it was F the Jews, gas the Jews. By the way, these were not the Jews in Israel they were referring to, but the Jews here in Sydney or in Australia.
Yep.
So the reason that I'm here today, and thank you for inviting me, was really just to make that point. We're entitled as Australians, all of us, and particularly the Jewish community, to expect more from our national broadcaster in relation to this crisis. So congratulations to Sky News for doing what it's doing. Thank you to Sky News for doing what it's doing. All credit to Shari, to Alex, to yourself, to all of those involved. But we're entitled to expect more from the ABC.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Joseph. But the key point is here that a billion-dollar public broadcaster with a charter that charges it with looking after these issues, with trying to bring the country together to educate the country, has done nothing, in my view, except to drive division and misinformation to the community on this issue. For instance, we could show you here the documentary, remind people that on this station we ran a documentary hosted by former Treasurer Josh Frydenberg about the rising issue of anti-Semitism. We ran this in June last year. I mean, this is not something that's come as a flash out of the pan, and still the ABC's been missing. And we have this summit coming up next week, of course, but I ask you this more telling question, I suppose. Rather than not doing enough on this issue, has the ABC actually pushed propaganda, misinformation, and made the issue of anti-Semitism in this country worse?
Well, as I said, I think it's not that the ABC has not covered the issue of anti-Semitism. It's just that it has, but it's always lagging behind what others are doing. And it's conscious of its own bias in connection with the Middle East. So, for example, the issue of anti-Semitism has been dealt with in some straight interviews. Sarah Ferguson interviewed Josh Frydenberg. She interviewed the anti-Semitism envoy, Gillian Siegel. There has been some straight reporting of it. So it's not entirely the case that the ABC has been missing in action, but then they go and interview a marginal group that's not really connected with the Jewish community, that's anti-Israel, as if to say, if we're going to cover anti-Semitism, we need to combine it with a very strange view of the position of the Jewish community and a biased view in relation to Israel, because that conforms with what seems to be the worldview of at least a large section of those who are dealing with the issue at the ABC.
Yeah.
So it's not satisfactory. It's not in keeping with the charter. It's not in keeping with the charter. But the point that you've made is relevant beyond the charter, and even beyond the issue of impartiality on the reporting of the Middle East, is the obligation of the ABC to the Australian Jewish community, and it's failed.
Joseph Gersh, thanks so much for joining us. Those very strong words. Former ABC director Joseph Gersh there. Yeah, I would sum it up as the ABC having this ridiculous notion of some equivalence between the arguments of Hamas and the arguments of Israel, which is extremely damaging, as we're seeing in this country.